Well, here we are again. I've learned a few things over the last couple years. It's almost April. Working on these buses, driving these buses. I've put some stuff on here about things I've done to help make the busing better. But there is some things you need to consider about driving or about owning a propane bus. I'm usually talking to the driver. So, first thing is fuel mileage. Fuel mileage, you'll never get any better. They say 4 to 6. You're looking at probably 3 to 5. Especially where we're at, it's more rural area. The roads have a lot of steep inclines, hills and hollers and things to go through. It's just rough. We've got a bus right now that gets less than 3 miles to the gallon, and it's in town. It's because it never gets out of first, second, or third. I don't know how fast she actually drives it. Hardly ever has to get fuel, but she don't have that many miles. But it doesn't get any fuel mileage whatsoever. Most of them running around the 4, 4.5, 4 3/4. I'd say 4 to 4 3/4 is probably where most of them sits. That's something you need to consider, because a diesel bus will get 9 miles to the gallon anyway. Some of them might get a little better depending on who drives it. Or these get 4.5, be a good estimate. Yes, diesel's a little higher right now than propane, but if you're using twice as much, are you really saving anything? The next thing you got to consider, it is a Ford engine. It is overhead cam. It's got spark plugs and individual coils, and that's the one thing they warned us over and over and over. Oh, if it goes to missing, you got to check for a bad coil or plug or a bad injector, which apparently that was an issue, or they wouldn't bring it up. We all know, anybody's worked on Fords, poor plugs and coils has always been an issue. Let's see. I went to a training about the fuel system. Well, the fuel system's got issues. You will put a fuel pump in between 25 and 30,000 miles, whether you like it or not. They said at most maybe 30,000 miles you'll have to change it. That's a draining of the tank. That's outside job, because you can't drain the tank on the inside being propane. It's got to be pumped down. It's got to be opened up and all the vapors let out, the pump changed. I forgot to explain, you also have to go through Roush Clean Tech to get your pump, so you've got to do all their steps in order to prove that the pump is bad. There's a valve on the engine that you're going to have to clean or replace. There's a valve on the back if the tank gets too hot or builds too much pressure. It's a relief valve. If it pops, you got to change. Several things they went over. I'd have to get a list back out. And your engine codes is not exactly what they're supposed to be. They took some engine codes, the PO codes, the generic codes, and they made them fit to where they wanted them. They necessarily didn't rename them. They just took some and used them. So sometimes you get some weird codes. That's a few things to think about. The transmission's another. It has a Super Duty transmission. Same thing you get in the diesels. It's got a really good first gear. It's got half of what it should be in the second, so if you're in a hard pull and you shift the second, or it shifts the second for you, you're going to lose your momentum. And that's what happens around here, because most of the time when you're in first gear, you're going up a hill or pulling in a hard spot, and when it shifts, it loses everything it's got. Another thing to consider as far as the transmission goes, the buses were set up at the factory. It's got adaptive learning transmission. I think I've covered this before, but it kind of learns how you drive. So if you've got a driver that pushes one pretty hard and makes it shift, they're going to be aggravated, because it was set up not to do that. It's going to shift a lot. It's constantly shifting, and when I say constantly shifting, it's a lot of change in the RPMs. It sounds like you're being abusive or aggressive, But it's really not over revving itself at all. It is governed. It's governed out at 4,200 RPM, I think. Or it's governed a little over 4,000. It'll hit 4,200 if somebody pushes it right now. So that's something you got to consider. That's the reason why your fuel mileage is always crazy, because it can't stay in gear. It doesn't have, even though they say it has 348 horsepower, 360 foot-pounds of torque, it only has it at a high RPM. Where a diesel has low torque, or has high torque at a low RPM, this engine doesn't build good torque until you get over 3,500 RPMs. Somewhere around 3,800 RPMs is where your torque and your horsepower is at its best, and they're matching, they're together. You've got the most power out of the engine. They cross lines if you look at it on a bar graph. That's where it pulls the best. About 30, really from 3,500 up is where you got your most power, which sounds a lot like a lot of RPMs. But for a V8, it's really not that bad. It's rated, engine's actually rated for 5,800. That's part of your fuel mileage though, because you've got to rev it up if you're in an area that has a lot of hills, a lot of steep inclines. Like our rural roads, they go up and down hills. Occasionally you'll get one that goes across the top, and sometimes you get one that runs the bottom, but in order to get to the bottom, you got to go over the top somewhere down the line. It will eat fuel if you stay in the pedal and make it go, or you're going to go slower. Now another issue, let's show you the diesel part, but buses are being built faster, and there's a lot of issues with the high RPMs and the vibration apparently, because things don't hold together like they used to. The transmission is a little crazy. It'll shift sometimes in awkward moments. That's the reason I made the video about resetting the transmission shift pattern. I done that because it helps this a whole lot. As far as the air cleaner business, yeah, every little thing I've mentioned, if you do them all, makes a difference in how it works. Each one of them helps the other one a little bit. But not every bus driver likes it. Not every bus driver wants you to change it. Let's see. Something else I've learned about it. As far as going down the road, it feels powerful. It'll run fast on flat ground. You got to be careful, because it will speed up on you before you realize it. You got to watch your speed on flat ground. Like I said, it pulls down bad on hills because of the shift pattern and the stretch between gear ratios. It's very bad between first and second. Second and third pretty good, and third and fourth, but the two overdrives, that in this area of the country, it's useless unless you get on the road like on a long trip. Making bus stops, you're going to constantly be shifting gears, starting and stopping. I use the shifter a lot, like that video I talked in there about moving the shifter. It helps the fuel mileage, and it helps the driver. Because the last thing you want to do is stall in the road, especially with a load of children. But to sum up, fuel mileage is an issue. The cost of fuel is an issue. The make and model of the engine, all the issue, goes with the Ford engine. The transmission and all its issues. Plus the issues of propane. Like I said, the fuel pump's going to go out. You got a gas valve that's going to go out or have to be took out and cleaned. It's got all kinds of things that has to be changed on a close intervals, like the oil has to be changed every 5,000 miles. It has to be synthetic. You really don't gain a lot in oil change if you can run a diesel for 10,000 miles, but you don't run this one for 5, and you're heading, instead of putting 7 quarts, that was the other thing. They say only 7 quarts in a filter. Well, 7 quarts won't fill it up. A man asked while we was in the training about filling it up with oil, and they said, "Oh, you can't fill this bus up with oil because it will mysteriously disappear, and they don't know where it goes." And I got a good idea. If If you've seen the video where the black oil rolls out when I change oil, you know it's burning it. That's the only way you can get carbon in a propane engine. It's got to be the motor oil. There's got to be some carbon particles in that synthetic oil. It can't be 100% carbon free, because propane's not supposed to make a mess. Propane's supposed to run clean, burn clean, leave the engine clean. Supposed to be so dry it's actually hard on the heads unless you put the right valves and the right seals and things in it. But just some thoughts. I ain't telling you you should or shouldn't. It's things to consider. Y'all have a good day.